Ladies and gentlemen, it's 1 o'clock on the RTL beach and we are already up for our next talk. Please join us on the stage and give a big round of applause and a warm welcome to Daniel Knapp, Chief Economist, IAB Europe, on a topic I'm sure you all love, how to make data-driven advertising good again. Thank you for the formula, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. Welcome everybody on this slightly cloudy day in Cannes. We're going to speak for the next half an hour about how to make data-driven advertising good again. Why again? And the question mark. We're going to do a panel very shortly to explore that. But first I want to set the scene to understand why are we saying again? Have we lost something? And where are we standing in this industry with regards to data-driven business models? We all know that data-driven business models are fundamental for a healthy and diverse media ecosystem. And you can see it clearly here on the beach if you count the number of European media owners collected here. You probably will not count more than 5 at best on your hand. So having this diverse and healthy landscape is essential. But trustworthy data and advertising is at the intersection between consumer trust, regulatory scrutiny, and also this continuous quest for innovation. And let's be honest, as an ad industry, we haven't always got it right in the past. So we need to make it good again. We need to close the gap between ambition and reality. And if you look at me, at the slides behind me, we did some press clippings to see what have been some of the kind of macro conversations about data and advertising over the last decade. And you see many familiar headlines here. Stronger privacy laws, creepy marketing, dark patterns in online ads, Google data probe, cookies and following and tracking. There is the kind of, in a sense here, massive privacy changes, cookie deprecation delayed, etc. If you look at all these things, you realize, wow, the debate hasn't really changed at all on the timeline here. Since 2015, 2024, we've been speaking about the same thing time and again. It's a broken record. Why have we not moved at all? And why have we not moved despite the fact that regulatory scrutiny and density of regulation has been rising and rising and rising? We as an industry seem to chase regulation, not preempt it, not go ahead of regulation, but often seem to do the bare minimum just to avoid getting caught in the regulatory web at a given moment. Look behind me here, from e-privacy to GDPR, Cookie Pledge, Digital Services Act, to new things on the horizon, in particular around ethics and sustainability, where debates are moving away from just data protection laws to, in a sense, the consequences of data, consequences of calculation, computation, what inferences about people are ethical and reasonable and in line with European values. We as an industry don't seem to have an answer to that. And often we stand here like this AI-generated gentleman behind me with empty pockets and not differentiated clear concepts. We're stuck in maximalist positions of either surveillance capitalism and data extractivism or business as usual, brushing it all away as if nothing has happened. These maximalist positions aren't productive. We need to change something. We need to come up with clear strategies to address the future of digital advertising and make data good again and not a toxic category. And the time to do that is right now, because there are 4 forces which are uniquely aligning to create a moment in 2024 to move from thinking to action. We have this rising regulatory scrutiny. We need to get ahead of that. We have a structural change with the infrastructure of digital advertising, third-party cookies going away. We need alternatives. We're also seeing that this pluralistic and healthy media ecosystem, it is under siege. We need to do something about this now as well. And also we see on the horizon new technology innovation, privacy-enhancing technologies, paired with now massive amounts of compute, where academic concepts that have been in the drawing board for about a decade can suddenly be developed and actually put into practice and services. And we must leverage those 4 forces to make data-driven advertising good again. To discuss how this could look like and what buyers and sellers need to do, how they must come together to align on this mission, I'm delighted to discuss this in a short panel discussion right now with Matt Green, Director of Global Media Services at the WFA, the World Federation of Advertisers, and Achim Schlosser, the VP Global Data Standards at Bertelsmann. Guys, please join me on stage and look forward to our discussion. And we need 3 chairs as well. No. We need to move. Here we are. Perfect.
Oh, yes. Okay. It is.
Here we are. Thank you both for joining us. Matt, first question to you. Data-driven advertising, good again. If you see the slides I just showed, have we been asleep at the wheel as an industry for the last decade? Dream walking into some kind of dystopian future?
Thank you for the question, Daniel. I mean, I do feel that when the regulatory environment started to evolve several years ago as GDPR came into force, we did feel, didn't we, that we were at the precipice of an enormous change. But it's been much slower than we might have anticipated. And I think it's fair to say, there's certainly a perception out there that in spite of that change, that regulatory change, a lot of the practices from yesteryear have remained in place. So have we been asleep at the wheel? Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's not been as progressive or abrupt a change as we anticipated. And I think we really, at WFA and many of our members, did anticipate a much more radical change than has been the case. So I think the industry probably should acknowledge that we possibly have been asleep at the wheel. I would agree. That said, I would suggest we are at a bit of a precipice right now.
And you mentioned earlier when we spoke that this Y2K moment was missing, right? This radical cut with the past, and that we have seen as this glacial continuation of business as usual. Achim, do you share that view? And also, when we look at these, surveillance capitalism versus business as usual narratives, why are we stuck in this black and white world? Where is the middle ground? Where is the productive future between those maximalist positions?
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, there has been a constant trickling change in the last 10 years, I would say. But I think why this, let's say, public perception didn't change, which actually reflects in regulatory changes, also approaches of supervision authorities, is that we've been playing catch-up, right? So I think largely the debate in the last 10 years was largely, okay, do we actually need consent for personalized advertising, data-driven advertising? I think it's clear now for a couple of years. Now we're debating how does it need to look like, but we're not really changing any type of the data practice that is underlying actually. And I think that's the most important point in terms of being future-proof, in terms of changing practices, specifically with the structural changing coming at. And I think the other point is that we had a two-sided discussion, right? On the one side, I think the viewpoint from part of the political spectrum and also privacy activists naturally that data-driven advertising overall, regardless of how you do it, should actually be not in place. Right, and the industry is kind of like itching forward, right, piece by piece, but only court ruling by court ruling, and not really defining their vision or our vision of how the future should look like.
I think that's a key point. If we look at privacy activists, they have a very strong and compelling, but also sometimes simplistic narrative, right? It seems so easy to explain that digital advertising is an extractive feature where data is a free-for-all, which is completely ungoverned. And indeed, if we look at ourselves as an industry compared to the financial industry, we are really ungoverned based on self-proclaimed standards with lack of regulatory oversight, we kind of lack KYC procedures, etc. But I think also at the same time, this kind of etching forward probably has something to do with protecting business models. Radical change, when it's not mandated, is always more difficult than finding some loopholes or trying to expand business or extend business as usual as much as possible. But I mean, you both have seen this kind of regulatory density, which seems to be suffocating right now. And do you think, when will this incrementalism stop? Is there going to be, for instance, too many regulations on one scale when the scale totally tips? Or is there something else which will trigger a paradigm shift in how we deal with this issue as an industry?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. There is clearly a need for more regulation, isn't there? And I think what we're seeing is the policymakers are reacting to the clear fact that the initial regulatory approaches haven't been strong enough. And so they're looking to regulate in several areas, aren't they? For privacy, consumer protection, and even competition as well. And those three areas, quite widespread, reflect the fact that there's just not enough in place to protect consumers and the industry. So, what's happening with the DMA, what's happening with the DSA, and all the other regulatory pieces that you put up on that screen, Daniel, are needed, I think. Without wishing to bring too much regulation into the space, which I think is a challenging thing to wish for and not something that advertisers would usually hope for. I am quite in favour of a lot of that stuff, especially the competition stuff, because I think there are strong forces which in our industry which are anti-competitive. So I'm pretty much in favour of more regulation in general, though I do think, as we discussed earlier, we need to be careful that we act really as very responsible actors and get ahead of that regulation as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I think to the point, I mean, DMA I think is a separate piece actually because it's about gatekeeper and market power. I think the other thing is actually with regulations going forward, how can there also be an informed dialogue, right? And an informed dialogue on the political side can only work with concrete concepts. I think that, for example, those that have been part of the last year's proceeding of the EU Commission of the cookie pledge, honestly, it was a mess, right? So you basically had two camps, consumer protection, they just wanted to push through with reject all, deny consent or pay models, and basically on the other hand, the industry can't really present concrete concept and that can either not make the regulatory changes going forward super nitty-gritty, right? I think that's a bit of the problem with the GDPR. It's a very generic law that needs a lot of interpretation. And on the other hand, we really can't present. So also on the cookie pledge discussions, you always get pinpointed with the worst players in the market. And the perception of the worst player is always applied to the whole ecosystem, right? And you can't really draw something out saying, oh, hey, we are well-behaved media players, behave in that way and not like you try to tell us in all of these conversations. And I think that's the gap that we are having in this discussion.
So it might be that not everybody wants to push along with a kind of paradigm shift, but in that sense, as some are rebranding the open web to the premium web, I think in the same regard, there need to be companies that are trailblazers for a productive dialogue with regulators who do more than the minimum, who build future-proof privacy practices. And I think what you both said, it's not just an issue of developing concrete concepts, but also communicating those concepts. As scaremongering stories are very easy to digest, they intuitively make sense. But we have this complex new landscape of privacy-enhancing technologies, abstract or arcane concepts like differential privacy. It's incredibly hard to communicate that not only within this industry, right, already in this industry, but let alone to regulators. So having, in a sense, a productive dialogue saying we work with you to kind of co-engineer a future based on technologies in line with European norms and values, I think is crucial. But it's still kind of open to me kind of what the right forum for that would be, in particular as the advertising industry is often seen as just any other industry. But if we bring media in the mix, a healthy pluralistic media ecosystem, it's different, right? It's the fourth estate, it's the kind of beacon of democracy. And that kind of brings me to the kind of next question. Regulations aside, can there be contemporary good advertising without data? Matt, what will your members say about that?
Well, I'd say that all of our advertisers are responsible, they want to be responsible actors, and I'm increasingly seeing a movement towards the rejection of some of the more damaging data protection practices. So there is a movement towards an ethical approach to data, a responsible approach to data applications. So what was your question again, sorry, Daniel?
It was about, can advertising work without data at all?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and so, I mean, look, not everyone's like this, not everyone's in the same camp, but I'm definitely seeing a growth of approaches around context. and the use of first-party data. I don't think that's everyone, and I think even those people who are doing that are still using data in other ways as well. But there is inevitably a movement in that direction. There are those who are eschewing those those practices in favor of other more favorable approaches, which don't require anywhere near the same level of data. But they may not be as effective, but that's how it goes.
Isn't the easy button so super tempting, right? When you're in some kind of closed environment, some black box optimization system, you just press the button, you don't have to worry about things. Can advertisers escape kind of the rush towards the easy button? Because good data is also hard. It's not easy.
I think that might be a false promise, right? Because in the end, if you think about the whole spectrum of requirements that advertisers have in terms of measurement, campaign control, attribution, targeting, doing all of that without any consent or any type of data access, I have a hard time believing this. And this is always part of the discussion also around contextual. I mean, leave aside the targeting. Nobody has a concept how to do that. And also looking at the AI side, we now, I think for the last few months, also have a slur of media and regulatory action in terms of usage of data in AI models. That's just something on top that we need to deal with. So that's also a data topic in the end, and also now at the stage where the level of definition of what personal data is so broad now that it's for me, it seems totally impractical to say we can't go without any type of data in digital advertising.
I mean, we had a long time where the principle of the more the merrier applied, and I think it had nowhere been as obvious as in programmatic advertising, where large sellers of media were plugging in as many SSPs as they could. When you go through some ads text files, they seem to be longer than a Dostoevsky novel sometimes. That's not really sustainable. But Achim, I know you're working on a few initiatives here. How can media owners who are sincere about, in a sense, quality advertising with a high integrity data supply chain, how can they innovate by saying we're going to do less with personal data, not more?
I think maybe the answer is do more with less data, right? I think easily speaking, right? Because the question is, let's say, given the structural shift we have in terms of shifting to an ecosystem where consented first-party data is going to be one of the big pillars going forward. The question then is for media owners and also for advertisers, say retail media and all of these use cases, who are you actually collaborating with, right? Because all of a sudden you as a media owner or as an advertiser in your own B2C relation are actually getting access to consented consumer data. So you really have to think about how many parties and which environments are we collaborating with that data, where it is a different question from I'm adding 10 additional tags where somebody's collecting data as a third party. So we're talking about the same data. It's just a matter of how and with whom are we actually processing it in a responsible fashion.
So you think data provenance questions play into that as well? Where does data come from? Whom is it being passed through? And media owners placing tighter controls in that regard, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is what we also came to realize is that a lot of media owners actually have a lot of good practices in place already that vastly differentiate them from the, let's say, overall market, right? See the discussion on top lists and that is going on. And the question is, how can you articulate that, right? So how can you actually bring this to life and monetize on top of it, not only commercially, but also from a public perception, right? Because if you talk to your relevant players in the market, you will see they all implemented quite similar tactics on reducing third parties, having proper consent practices in place, having proper consumer engagement in place. I mean, it can all be involved, and also we can also shift to more, let's say, stringent technology approaches with clean rooms and privacy-enhancing technology. But there's actually a lot to talk about already, which we don't do. And so that's the question, the forum, and we also kind of like need this cross-party approach in terms of media owners, agencies, and advertisers to define a path forward on a joint vision how responsible advertising looks like. And it also has this approach, I mean, talking about data streams, obviously there's this interesting relation also to the eco part of it, right? Because the lesser partners you have, obviously, the better your footprint is going to be.
CO2 footprint, yes. But I think it's interesting what you mentioned. So in a sense, that means that the advertising product is also changing. You're not just selling inventory, saying access to kind of high attention eyeballs, for instance, or advertising placed in a high quality editorial environment, but the former kind of backroom geeky topics like data, they become an integral, maybe equal part of the advertising product mix. But that's of course a hard sell because typical advertising salespeople, they're not used to selling something like this. It's a different language. So this repackaging I see is also some of the most challenging things. And Matt, I mean, you represent some of the world's largest advertisers, and I know you have many programs in the WFA to kind of improve kind of media supply chains, etc. But you know, when I go through advertisers' earnings calls, you know, Unilever, Mondelez, and many of these massive underwriters of the media economy, they're talking about efficiency and outcome-driven, and the role of the CMO is changing, right? Advertising isn't just a pillar, but it feeds into broader digital transformation exercises. It needs to be more measurable. What do your advertisers today expect from advertising? And can, in a sense, traditional media owners with digital businesses actually deliver on these expectations right now?
Yeah, you're right. Lots of digital transformation initiatives, lots of initiatives to bring data into the organization and apply it in ways which makes advertising more effective, more sophisticated. And so there is a bit of a walk back, potentially, isn't there? And as ever, there's a spectrum, isn't there? So while we've got those people over there who've been using a lot of data, there's also those who are trying to retreat from data. But Achim, your point really resonates, which is how do we do more with less? And I think that's exactly what anyone rationally would sort of agree with here, isn't it? You know, we should be seeking to reduce the amount of data we're using, to use it in a very ethical fashion, whilst also trying to maintain as much of the use cases from the past as possible, whilst accepting that we just realistically may not be able to do everything that we used to be able to do. And I think that's the message which is going to resonate with most advertisers. They seek to be responsible players. They totally understand their role in the ecosystem, and they want that. So you know that's where they'll be. They'll be seeking to espouse those responsible approaches. And I think there's going to be a lot of appetite to collaborate across the industry to create more of these kinds of initiatives where, you know, I mean, because it sounds a lot like a comms challenge, doesn't it? How to communicate about how these techniques work. So there's a need to communicate externally with regulators and consumers even about these issues, and advertisers want to be part of that communication plan. But it also strikes me that there's a need for more sort of validation and certification and demonstrations, outward demonstrations, expressions that what is being done meets the highest threshold, because we do have a lot of actors that say, oh yes, everything I've done is absolutely, you know, we adhere to this, we can do that. And it's not always true, is it? So we do need, as an industry, I feel, and I think advertisers would advocate for this, we do need the means to be able to demonstrate that what is being done here is privacy compliant, genuinely.
Yeah, I think this is spot on, right? I mean, first of all, obviously we need kind of like the framing commitments about good practices, and then at best we can transition into an ecosystem where this stuff can be validated, right? At best technically enforced, obviously purpose-bound in a sense, and obviously in a way then also auditable, which is obviously a tricky thing from a governance perspective. But I think there's a lot of things that can be done, but naturally we need to get away also from, okay, there's this two-side piece of paper, and that's kind of like the self-regulatory approach that's not going to be good enough. So it needs to be much more subtle, detailed, yes. and
I mean, there have been so many declarations of intent in the industry, of industry initiatives coming together, buyers and sellers, big press release, and then initiative disbanded a couple of months later. I really think we cannot afford that anymore. But of course, there has to be a spectrum between, in a sense, commitment to certain practices on the one hand of the spectrum, and then kind of hard technical standards and enforcement on the other, right? And that, of course, also requires measuring things, ensuring that compliance is there, and penalizing bad actors. I think if we as an industry say we want to do good, but we refrain from penalizing bad actors, we will not be taken seriously.
Right, and this most probably is it's not gonna be a sprint, but a marathon, right? In a sense, we can start with certain bits that are actually visible today. We can start in certain bits that are actually enforceable today and measurable today, and then actually shifting more and more of that into the more complex implementation, right? We're not gonna shift to first-party data, all cream room, all privacy-enhancing technology tomorrow, right? But it needs to be an incremental approach with a big vision sitting on top of it, and then kind of like an implementation path towards it.
If you can briefly peek in some kind of potential or hypothetical toolbox, Achim, right? What would be some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the screwdrivers you would take out immediately to enhance kind of data supply chain integrity?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the easiest part is really what has been done also on the media owner side in terms of what I was saying, right? Reduction of first parties, number of tags on sites, vendors you're working with, all the good consent practices that have implemented, right? That you're not spanning consumers consistently, that you have also a privacy enhancing tech on site that actively scans, checks if privacy settings are abided by, and also B2B relations are abided by. So there's a lot actually in place already, which separates, let's say, good practices from, let's say, the rest, so to say. And obviously there are a few things that are quite easy to implement, which just need to be done. And obviously then the, let's say, more ambitious topics, right? When we talk about shifting more and more processing on the server side because of first-party data, we actually don't need all that client-side processing, which is the major source of data leakage today. But it is going to be harder to audit on the other hand. So it's a mixed bag, but I think there are a sizable number of things that a lot of media owners have implemented, which everyone would say, okay, I mean, this is common sense, we just need to communicate it.
Matt, you have already published quite an extensive set of guidelines in the WFA on kind of good media practices relating to CSR, sustainability, but also media quality, supply chain. When you listen to what Achim is saying, is that aligning with kind of the work tracks you've had, or could some of these initiatives maybe augment and add more detail to what you've been working on?
Yeah, massively. Yeah, we were here last year to talk about our media charter, which is a document which outlines the areas where advertisers seek to collaborate to create change. And there's chapters on competition, there's chapters on measurement and accountability, sustainability, and others. And the issues we're discussing today fall variously across this document. That's one document we've published amongst others, including guidelines on data ethics and others. So what we're doing is to work with our network of national advertiser associations to try and draw attention to some of the issues which are expressed in that media charter document. There are a bunch of things going on. There's a lot going on. We have a program which I'm talking about tomorrow. It's called HALO. It's a cross-media measurement initiative, which indeed employs differential privacy, multi-party computation, data clean rooms, and others, widely regarded as some of the most sophisticated approaches in the industry right now. So that's a sort of outcrop from some of the guidelines that we've published, and there are other things going on within our purview. Our partners at the Association of National Advertisers and the Brits in the UK, the ISBA are doing a load of work on data supply chain stuff as well. So there's all sorts of stuff going on, which I feel fits so well with what you're talking about, Achim, that I feel like the ground is so well fertilized for more collaboration between the buy side and the sell side, but indeed between the traditional media owners, but also the platforms, which, like it or not, are a very large part of the ecosystem. And I just see great opportunities. I think we're right in the time. Our time is now.
You're so optimistic. We just need the right forum to make this happen, right? Is it going to be this beach? Is it going to be a certain association? We're running out of time, so just a quick view in the crystal ball. Now, let's be honest. Next year, when we sit here, will we still speculate and pontificate, or will we have some first, initiative set up between WFA, Bertelsmann, and others to really tackle this in practice? What do you think?
A short answer, yes. Otherwise, it's really too late, and we might actually be in the next swirl of regulatory discussions around digital fairness, which we all don't want actually to do spend our time on, but more of defining ourselves how the ecosystem should look like.
Yeah, so what it looks like, I don't know, but I'd be very surprised if we weren't here next year being able to point to something and say that is a material change over the past 12 months.
Okay, then I know how I'll update my slides for next year's presentation, and I'll hold you both to account for that. Thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure. Big round of applause for my two excellent panelists. And thank you for those watching in the live stream and catch up. And back to Adelines HQ. Thank you.